today I am reviewing a book I've just finished. It took me days. This book took me ages to read. I mean, days for me on one book is a long thing. But it was thoroughly enjoyable and they were days well spent. So Charles Stross, author of Glass House. I haven't read very many of his books. This one has actually been on my to-read shelf for ages. So all hail Past Deb for good taste. Even if I've got no idea how I came across it or why I decided to put it on that shelf, it was well chosen. Now, before I say anything about the actual contents, I want to talk about the cover because I think maybe it's a science fiction thing, but covers are great things. The cover is totally blank and white with only the writing, but the dust cover has got artwork on it that I came to appreciate more and more as I read. So you've got this interesting combination of a lot of white, which doesn't grab the eye as much as some books do. You've got this character looking out into the distance, and if you look at it closely, you'll see that it's got a rather fantasy type helmet with a horn, but if you look, but I don't know if you can see it, but if you look a bit closer, there's also a camera on it. Not sure what that's meant to be. So you get this D&D meets tech feel right there. Looking out into the distance, and you've got some very virtual reality type architecture and some geometrics that suggest you're maybe looking at something techie. But on the other side of it, you've got old buildings, and this is set in old Edinburgh, Scotland. I think it's Edinburgh. And it's very much got that medieval feel as well. So the balance of D&D, fantasy, old school to tech that is in the book comes through in the cover, and then you turn the cover around, what you've got the whole thing's reversed and does your head in for a second until you realise, which is also very much appropriate for this book. Right, so it's been on my shelf for a while. It starts off with a very short prologue. The prologue has got the format of an email that's being sent to someone with a job offer. And as one of the headings, instead of you've got to Nigel MacDonald or whatever, who is a integral part of the early part of the plot. But there's also one line that says in bold, auto summary, a job offer, vaguely menacing. It was the perfect start to this book. It's got the we are watching you creepy tech job offer, and there's an overall spooky feel to the whole email that's actually a pun that you will only get if you have read this book. And it's just a perfect intro. Now, I have always loved the prologue every single time I've picked this book up, but then it moves on from the prologue to the first chapter, and you get a jarring sense because the prologue and the first chapter don't really mesh very well in my head. And it was often the first chapter that made me put it down and read something else for a while. This time I didn't. This time I was in a different reading headspace, and the first chapter moves on to a real life character, a Scottish cop, Sue. Now, I was sucked in by page 3 this time, I think. Sue is a perfect character to introduce the reader to this world and this story. I enjoyed her accents. She's got multiple accents. She's got a very Scottish accent, which I liked. She's got a cut glass, more, received English style accent, which she uses when she's trying to suggest to public school little snots that she's not going to be intimidated by them. She's a great character, and she's perfect for an introduction to this book because she is a non-gamer, non-IT person. And that is a perfect introduction to a world which is very, very cyberpunk, because the amount of daily tech in the world of this book is astounding compared to our world. Or is it? Or is it just one tiny step forward? You decide. But because it's so far ahead, you can't really start in the head of someone like Jack, who we encounter later. He knows too much about the tech, and too much of what he knows is integral and unconscious, and we don't know it. But Sue doesn't know that stuff. She's just a normal policeman working in her world, using the tech of the day. And one piece of tech of the day that police use in this world are these tech goggles. They're like I image them like sunglasses, and what they do is they slot into a contained virtual reality that only belongs to the cops, and it's called Cop Space. So when you've got the glasses on, Cop Space clothes the world in things that only the people in Cop Space can see. Now, I'm pretty sure that there's a movie with this effect, or it might be a Black Mirror short, I'm not sure. You walk around and you're seeing the world, you're seeing the people coming toward you, you're seeing the cars, but you're also seeing information given to you by your virtual reality. So the movie I'm thinking of, they pass persons, it's give them name, race, address and things until they pass someone who has none of that. And that's impossible. There can't be a person who isn't on the net. In this Cop Space, when Sue walks around, she gets details about people, like she can pass a group on the street and realise that some of them are in probation and things like that. But it also does other things, like if you go to a scene of a crime, Cop Space will give you the infractions and the way you deal with them. Now, do you see the problem with working with that level of tech where no one knows how to do anything without Cop Space? People my age will, science fiction readers will, and that comes into play in one of the many plots that this book envelops later. Right here. So, Sue's a great person to introduce us to the daily level of daily tech that people have. Our next character is Elaine. She's a forensic accountant who lives a pretty normal life, works her job, uses the tech that she needs for her job and her regular life. But her recreational activity is dueling with 17th century swords. And this club, or these people who duel, do this in their own form of virtual reality. They have a helmet and they've got virtual reality which clothes them in the right accoutrements, the right characters. I think they create characters for this, and the right background for the 17th century dueling that they're doing. And I am so incredibly jealous of this. I myself do sword fighting. It's 10th, 11th century, and I want her tech so badly. I feel that that is where the early virtual reality of the early 90s should have led to. I don't know how many people remember that. You used to put on a little pair of goggles and stand in an enclosed space and you could see things and shoot at them. Why didn't that evolve into turning me into a Viking wielding a two-handed sword? Why? Okay. On to our third character. Our third character is Jack. Jack is a games programmer with considerable skills in in-game combat systems and a whole lot more, much of which I only marginally understand, to be honest. Even when I read it slowly and reread it, I'm not a techie. I think most cyberpunk sci-fi readers have to be okay with not understanding every single word of tech talk. It didn't bother me. For people who need to understand every single word and concept in a book, they may be responsible for some of the low rating reviews on Goodreads I've seen for this book. Now Jack, when we first encounter him, is not being a techie god. He is being drunk and dysfunctional in Amsterdam and is handcuffed to a light pole. It's a great introduction to Jack as a character because it shows the dysfunctional, flawed, aimless side of his character, and that makes him very interesting. Now, Jack on his own would never be able to carry a book like this as a character, I don't think, because that aimlessness is built into him and it's what makes him interesting. But Jack with Elaine work well together. They've both got their own flaws and their own insecurities and their own ignorance and their own knowledge, but they work well together and they'll take over in positions from each other. Then add Sue into the mix and you've got a perfect dynamic of different characters with different skills. Oh, come on. Different skills doing different things, and it carries the multi-plot novel very well. So the characters are a big part of the book, and the interactions are a big part of carrying the story. Another part of this book that I really enjoyed is the writing. It's fairly anonymous in some ways, but it's very descriptive, and it's It's chock-a-block full of references. Absolutely chock-a-block. But it's pretty enough that you don't necessarily need to understand all of them. For example, this is off page 7. The building they're parked outside is a raw contrast to the posh wheels. It's more like a 1950s public toilet than a corporate office. Just 4 concrete walls propping up a flat slab of characterless roof that seems to scream asbestos with all the force of its wheezing mesothelioma-ridden lungs can muster. Maybe it's some kind of upmarket cottaging club for the tech startup crowd. That's the kind of writing. I really enjoyed it. Okay, so we start with Sue. The plot proper starts with Sue, I guess you could say. She's sitting in a cafe drinking her coffee and doing her day-to-day jobs when a call comes through to the police dispatcher about a robbery. Now, the dispatcher originally thinks that it's just someone off their meds because they're talking about orcs and dragons robbing a bank. But eventually it comes through to someone who makes some connections, decides that it isn't actually a prank call or someone who's a bit cuckoo, and sends it through to Sue. Sue then goes to a small startup company, the one that I've just described from page 7, which is one of the things it does to make a buck is to maintain in-game systems in certain parts of maps and certain parts of games. And one of the things it does is it maintains a bank for player characters to use. So, short explanation for anyone who hasn't gamed. If you start up a new character and you're wandering around on the first level of a multi-dungeon game, you have a sword, it's not worth very much, but it's all you've got. You hack at things, eventually you find a better sword, you put your first sword into an inventory, and you start using your better one. As you move up and up the scale of character development and down the dungeon level, your swords get better, and you have to make a decision how many to carry because you've got limited encumbrance, as it's called. And at some point, when you're a really, really strong level player, or if you're in the bottom dungeon level of Diablo, which is where I stopped doing this stuff, you can go back to the upper realm and sell your items, or you can just throw them away. When you become a super character, in a way that online gaming these days allows, but wasn't really an option when it was just laptop gaming, you may want to keep the really heavy-duty items you've got, but you can't carry all of them. So this is the bank this startup company is maintaining. For a small fee, characters can pay to have their items stored safely. And when Sue gets there, it's been robbed by orcs that came from another part of a game which shouldn't be possible. Anyway, that's how Sue gets into it. The company that Elaine works for insures the startup company, who is very possibly going to go out of business if what has been found to happen gets out into the general world. So Elaine comes in. She's brought into it by her company because she's the only one there with any sort of gaming experience whatsoever, but she's got no online gaming experience, so she insists that someone like Jack is hired. That's how we get all our 3 in one. So in many ways the plot revolves around gaming and internet and tech. The tech in the world part is excellent and really interesting. I'm not a gamer, but as I've mentioned, I've done some enough to enjoy and understand at least a little bit of what's being talked about. Would it be better to be a gamer and read this? Probably. I think you'd get more of the references. I got on okay, and 2 of the 3 protagonists aren't gamers either, so there's enough explanations inserted to enjoy the narrative, and you don't have to get all the references. Now, I did roleplay for quite a while, and many gamers started in role-playing before they got into online gaming, so there's a lot of references there too. There's reference to the Lovecraft games, which are horrors based on Lovecraft, the Greyhawk map, AD&D, and I got a lot of the references, though perhaps not all of them. I've got a vague notion what tunneling is. So the classic line that is quoted everywhere about this book, where is it? Never mind. I get some of the tech, I get some of the gaming, I get maybe a fair bit of the AD&D references. Some of the older stuff I'm better with, like it mentions Second Life, and that was a thing just as I was getting out of gaming in general. So I'm not even going to really try and talk about the plot, because there isn't one. There's hundreds, and they tie in, and at the end of the book, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure which ones were real and which ones weren't, and how the ones that were real tied in. So again, if you want to close the final cover of a book and know exactly what happened in there, this might not be the book for you. It's too chock-a-block full of stuff. You've got to enjoy the ride. You don't need to know everything. That's what life is, anyway. But some of the people who do need to know everything, they may be responsible for some of those other low reviews. Oh yeah, that from that bit I read, you'll have realised that it's third-person narration. Apparently that bothers some people too. I thought it was good. Another thing some people might not love about this book is it gets a bit sweary, especially at the end, where it also gets... You can feel all the threads coming together to a really what's going to happen type ending. There's a few F-bombs. If that bothers you, maybe not your sort of thing. I feel that most Aussies will be fine. Don't know about other nations. If this is a correct depiction of Scotland and the police force in Scotland, I think Scots will be fine too. And those accents. Well done, the accents. They are well done. They're not like some accents, which never give you a rest. The Scottish accents, I thought, made the book much richer and much more enjoyable. I loved the way the accents attached to Sue and the other people. If you don't like foreign accents, I don't think it need bother you. There's not that much of it. Also, if you don't like foreign accents, rethink your life choices. They make life more interesting. Yeah, oh, one final thing. So this, I believe, was published or copyrighted from 2007 and set in 2024. We're not here yet. Little tendrils of some things, like the mobile phones. The mobile phones at one stage become unreliable and they have to go out and buy prepaid. There's one gorgeous little bit where a new cop tries to go out and get a prepaid, but the only one he can get is from Toys R Us, and it's got pink unicorns on it. And that really highlights one of the things I love the most about this book. It is so completely full of stuff. There's so many concepts, and they're so richly woven together. You never feel like the author is trying to throw too much at you. You never feel like he's trying to make a point or wave a flag about how much he knows about things. It just creates a world that is as full of richness and complexity as the real world. I really loved it. Might not go on to the next one in the series for a while, but I fully intend to at some stage, and I definitely want to be reading more Charles Stross. I could probably keep on talking about this book for quite some time. There was so much in it that was good, but I'll stop now. Oh, comment. Tell me if it's worth reading the second one, if you've read it. Probably is. I think it probably is.